Some directors have begged studios to remove their names from the credits. Others have refused to discuss certain films for decades. One filmmaker on this list literally walked out of his own premiere and never watched the final cut. These are 10 catastrophic box office disasters so painful that the people who made them wished the world would simply forget they ever existed. Town and Country, 2001. Warren Beatty spent 3 years making a romantic comedy that nobody asked for and absolutely nobody wanted by the time it finally stumbled into theaters. Director Peter Chelsom started with a modest concept about middle-aged couples navigating infidelity and midlife crises. But the production spiraled into one of the most notorious money pits in Hollywood history. The budget ballooned from an initial $20 million to a staggering $105 million, largely because Beatty demanded endless reshoots, rewrites, and script overhauls that stretched production across multiple seasons and locations. Entire storylines were filmed and then discarded. Supporting actors were hired, shot their scenes, and then cut from the movie entirely. Chelsom reportedly lost creative control early in the process as Beatty and the studio pulled the film in opposite directions, turning what should have been a breezy ensemble comedy into an incoherent mess that pleased absolutely no one. When it finally opened, it earned less than $7 million domestically, making it one of the biggest financial disasters of the early 2000s. Chelsom has been remarkably candid about the experience, calling it a soul-crushing ordeal that nearly ended his desire to make films. Critics savaged it with a kind of glee reserved for projects where the behind-the-scenes chaos is far more entertaining than anything on screen. The film holds a dismal 13% on Rotten Tomatoes, and Beatty himself essentially retired from acting for 15 years afterward. Sometimes the biggest bomb is not the movie itself, but the career wreckage it leaves behind. The Adventures of Pluto Nash, 2002. Eddie Murphy, at the peak of his commercial powers, made a science fiction comedy set on the moon in 2087, and the result was so catastrophic that Warner Brothers shelved it for 2 full years before quietly dumping it into theaters like evidence they hoped nobody would find. Director Ron Underwood, who had delivered the charming hit Tremors a decade earlier, found himself trapped inside a production that cost $100 million and earned back barely $4 million in its opening weekend. The final domestic total limped to just over $7 million, making Pluto Nash one of the most expensive failures in the history of cinema. The film sat on a shelf from 2000 to 2002 while the studio tried desperately to figure out how to salvage it, and the answer turned out to be that they could not. Murphy plays a nightclub owner on the moon, fighting off gangsters who want his property. A premise that sounds fun on paper, but plays out with the comedic energy of a waiting room. The special effects looked dated even by 2002 standards, and the jokes landed with a thud so consistent you could set a metronome to it. Underwood essentially vanished from feature filmmaking after this disaster, retreating into television work. Murphy himself has never spoken about the film at length, and when interviewers have brought it up, the silence has been louder than any punchline the movie attempted. It remains a masterclass in how star power and a massive budget mean absolutely nothing without a script that works. Cutthroat Island, 1995. Rennie Harlin bet everything on a pirate epic at a time when Hollywood considered pirate movies to be pure box office poison, and the result was so financially devastating that it literally destroyed a studio. Carolco Pictures, the company that had produced Rambo and Total Recall, collapsed partly because of this film's astronomical losses. The production cost approximately $100 million, which was enormous for 1995. And it earned back barely $10 million domestically. The behind-the-scenes drama was almost more dramatic than the film itself. Michael Douglas was originally set to star alongside his then-wife, Geena Davis, but he departed the project, leading to a frantic scramble to find a replacement. Matthew Modine eventually took the role, but the chemistry between the leads never ignited the way Harlan needed. Stunt performers were injured during the elaborate action sequences. Sets were built and then rebuilt. The script went through multiple writers who could not agree on the tone. Harlan, who was married to Davis at the time, has spoken about the film with visible discomfort in interviews, Acknowledging that the ambition far outstripped the execution, the Guinness Book of World Records actually listed Cutthroat Island as the biggest box office bomb in history for several years. What makes this even more remarkable is that just 8 years later, Pirates of the Caribbean proved that pirate movies could absolutely work. Harlan was simply a decade too early with a film that was not good enough to overcome the genre's toxic reputation. Battlefield Earth, 2000. John Travolta spent nearly 2 decades trying to get this adaptation of L. Ron Hubbard's science fiction novel onto the big screen, and when he finally succeeded, the result became one of the most ridiculed films in motion picture history. Director Roger Christian, who had won an Academy Award for set decoration on Star Wars, delivered a film so visually bizarre that nearly every single shot is tilted at a Dutch angle for no discernible reason. The entire movie looks like it was filmed by a camera operator who could not find a level surface. Travolta plays Turl, a 9-foot-tall alien overlord who has enslaved humanity in the year 3000. And his performance is so extravagantly hammy that it circles past bad, through so bad it's good, and arrives at something genuinely bewildering. The film cost approximately $73 million and earned roughly $21 million domestically. Christian has been openly bitter about the experience, claiming that the studio slashed his budget and shooting schedule to the point where he could not execute his vision. Travolta, meanwhile, has defended the film for years, while simultaneously acknowledging that perhaps the execution did not match his passion for the source material. It swept the Razzie Awards, winning a record number of categories, including Worst Picture of the Decade. Critics competed to write the most devastating review, with one famously calling it a crime against cinema that should be investigated by authorities. The film's connection to Scientology added another layer of controversy that followed it like a shadow, long after the box office receipts confirmed the obvious. Gigli, 2003. Martin Brest was one of the most respected directors in Hollywood. He made Scent of a Woman, Beverly Hills Cop, and Midnight Run. Then he made Gigli, and he has not directed a single film since. This is a movie that destroyed a career so completely that Brest essentially vanished from the industry entirely. The film starred Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez at the absolute peak of their tabloid saturation, and the studio leaned so heavily into their real-life relationship that the movie became less of a film and more of a celebrity spectacle that audiences actively wanted to punish. Originally conceived as a dark crime thriller about a low-level enforcer kidnapping a federal prosecutor's mentally disabled brother, the film was recut into a romantic comedy after the studio saw the media frenzy surrounding Affleck and Lopez. The tonal shifts are jarring. Scenes that were meant to be threatening play as awkward. Moments meant to be charming feel forced. The budget was reported at approximately $54 million, and the domestic gross crawled to barely $7 million. Brest asked to have his name removed from the final cut, which tells you everything about how far the finished product drifted from his original vision. Both Affleck and Lopez have been gracious about the experience in later interviews, but neither has expressed any desire to revisit the material. Brest's silence, which has lasted over 2 decades now, speaks volumes about the kind of wound that a film like this can inflict on a filmmaker who simply lost control of their own project. The 13th Warrior, 1999. Michael Crichton and John McTiernan, the director of Die Hard and Predator, should have been an unstoppable combination. Instead, their collaboration on this Viking adventure film became one of the ugliest production nightmares of the 1990s. Antonio Banderas stars as an Arab ambassador who joins a band of Norse warriors on a mission to fight a mysterious evil terrorizing their homeland. The premise is fantastic, and the source material, Crichton's novel Eaters of the Dead, was a clever retelling of Beowulf through a historical lens. But the production fell apart almost immediately. McTiernan delivered a cut that the studio found unsatisfying, so Crichton himself stepped in to reshoot significant portions of the film and re-edit the entire project. The result is a movie that feels like 2 different visions smashed together, with neither filmmaker getting the final product they wanted. The budget swelled to approximately $160 million when marketing costs are included, and it earned back roughly $61 million domestically. McTiernan has been open about his frustration, essentially disowning the theatrical cut as something that no longer represented his work. Crichton, before his passing in 2008, rarely mentioned the film. Banderas has called the shoot one of the most difficult experiences of his career, describing tensions on set that made every day feel like a battle. What stings most is that buried somewhere inside this disaster is genuinely great material. The battle sequences are thrilling, the atmosphere is rich, and the central concept is brilliant. It is one of those bombs where you can see exactly what the movie should have been. Ishtar, 1987. Elaine May directed one of the most infamous box office disasters in cinema history, and the tragedy is that she was a genuinely brilliant filmmaker whose previous work was sharp, funny, and fearless. Warren Beatty and Dustin Hoffman star as two spectacularly untalented songwriters who accidentally become entangled in a CIA plot in Morocco. The film cost approximately $51 million, which was considered obscene in 1987, and it earned back roughly $14 million domestically. The production became a punchline before it even opened, with stories leaking about ballooning costs, difficult shooting conditions in the Saharan desert, and tensions between May and the studio. Columbia Pictures essentially used Ishtar as the poster child for Hollywood excess, and the film's title became shorthand for cinematic failure for an entire generation. What most people do not know is that a significant number of critics who actually watched the film found it genuinely funny. May's dialogue is witty, the chemistry between Beatty and Hoffman is charming, and the satirical jabs at American foreign policy are sharper than the film's reputation would suggest. But none of that mattered once the narrative of disaster took hold. May, who had already struggled with studio interference throughout her career, retreated from directing entirely. She did not helm another feature for over 30 years. The film has undergone a quiet, critical reappraisal in recent years, with writers arguing that its reputation as the worst film ever made is wildly exaggerated, and that the real story is about a talented woman director being scapegoated for the same kind of spending that male directors got away with routinely. Heaven's Gate, 1980. Michael Cimino won the Academy Award for Best Director for The Deer Hunter in 1978, and then he used that goodwill to create a Western so expensive and so catastrophic that it single-handedly destroyed United Artists, the legendary studio co-founded by Charlie Chaplin and Mary Pickford. The film tells the story of the Johnson County War in 1890s Wyoming, where wealthy cattle barons hired mercenaries to kill immigrant settlers they accused of cattle rustling. Cimino's original cut ran over 5 hours. The studio demanded he reduce it. He cut it to roughly 3 hours and 40 minutes for the premiere, which was met with some of the most hostile reviews in modern film history. Critics called it self-indulgent, incomprehensible, and a monument to directorial arrogance. The budget exploded from approximately $12 million to around $44 million, a catastrophic overrun that included Cimino demanding that entire sets be torn down and rebuilt because they were slightly off from his vision. United Artists was sold to MGM in the aftermath. The New Hollywood movement, which had given directors like Cimino, Coppola, and Scorsese unprecedented creative freedom, effectively ended because of this one film. Studios clawed back control and never fully let go again. Here is the twist, though. Over the decades, critics have revisited the film, and many now consider it a masterpiece. A restored version, released in 2012, was met with glowing reviews and standing ovations at the Venice Film Festival. Cimino, who spent 30 years as Hollywood's cautionary tale, got to witness at least some vindication before his passing in 2016. John Carter, 2012. Andrew Stanton had directed Finding Nemo and Wall-E, two of the most beloved animated films in history, and Disney handed him $263 million to make his live-action debut. The result lost the studio an estimated $200 million after marketing costs, and became one of the most expensive flops ever produced. Based on Edgar Rice Burroughs' century-old Barsoom novels, John Carter tells the story of a Civil War veteran transported to Mars, where he discovers he has superhuman abilities due to the planet's lower gravity. The source material had inspired nearly every major science fiction franchise from Star Wars to Avatar, which created an impossible irony. By the time John Carter finally reached the screen, everything it had originally inspired had already strip-mined its best ideas, making the original feel derivative of its own imitators. Stanton has spoken about the experience with remarkable candor, acknowledging that the transition from animation to live action was far more challenging than he anticipated. The marketing campaign was disastrous. Disney removed "of Mars" from the title because they believed the word Mars was box office poison after the failure of Mars Needs Moms just a year earlier. The resulting generic title gave audiences absolutely no indication of what the film actually was. Critics were mixed, with many praising the visuals and world-building while criticizing the pacing and storytelling. What hurts most is that there is a genuinely entertaining pulp adventure buried inside this bloated production. Stanton returned to animation afterward, and this film remains the reason Disney executives flinch when anyone pitches an expensive original science fiction property. The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, 1988. Terry Gilliam is the patron saint of disastrous productions, but this film nearly killed him professionally in a way that even his other troubled projects could not match. The story follows the legendary Baron Munchausen as he embarks on fantastical adventures to save a besieged city, traveling to the moon, inside a volcano, and to the belly of a sea monster. Gilliam's imagination is on full display in every frame, with practical effects and set designs that are genuinely jaw-dropping in their creativity and ambition. The problem was that the budget spiraled from an estimated $25 million to approximately $46 million, while the production was plagued by weather disasters, injuries, and a studio that had changed leadership midway through filming and actively wanted the project to fail. Columbia Pictures, under its new management, essentially buried the film. It was released in fewer than 200 theaters, despite being one of the most expensive productions of its era. The domestic gross was barely $8 million. Gilliam has spoken extensively about the sabotage he believes the studio inflicted, claiming they deliberately undermined the release to write it off as a tax loss. Critics who actually saw it were largely enthusiastic, praising the visual imagination and the wild, anarchic energy that only Gilliam could deliver. Over the years, it has been recognized as one of his finest achievements, a film bursting with wonder, wit, and a handmade beauty that CGI has never replicated. The fact that it was buried by corporate politics rather than audience rejection makes it the most tragic entry on this entire list. A masterpiece that was murdered in its crib by the very people who were supposed to bring it to the world. These 10 films represent billions of dollars in losses and decades of regret from filmmakers who poured their souls into projects that the world rejected. Some deserved their fate. Others were genuinely brilliant films that got crushed by bad timing, worse marketing, or studio sabotage. Drop your thoughts in the comments and tell me which of these bombs you have actually seen and whether any of them deserve a second chance. But here is the real question that should keep you up tonight. If studios keep punishing directors for swinging big and missing, are we slowly killing the only kind of filmmaking that actually matters?